Okay, it's 9:01, so let's start
Okay.
officially. Hello, it's my honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Art Kramer. He's a cognitive psychologist and neuroscientist. He's well known for many of his work, but this is very influential. It's a very important work, physical activity on cognitive and brain health. And his work is well cited many places and prestigious journals, and also many media outlets. Dr. Kramer.
Thanks, Professor Han. It's good to be there, even virtually. It's nice to be in Korea again. It's been a while since I've been there. So Professor Han and I worked together a while ago, but still have an interest and overlapping interest. In fact, I saw you had an exercise study recently with menopausal women, and it reduced the symptoms and enhanced overall function. So for me, I started out, I got my PhD in the same university Professor Han did, that is the University of Illinois. I got my PhD in 1984, so a long time ago. And then I was asked to be a professor, and I've been a professor and an institute director. I was an institute director at the Beckman Institute for Advanced Science and Technology. I ran an MRI lab for a number of years, a center for magnetic resonance imaging. I came to Northeastern 9 years ago to try something a little different. I was in charge of all research and graduate education. I decided soon that I'd rather start another research institute, which I did. It's called the Center for Cognitive and Brain Health, and I left just a few months ago. I work with researchers, students, faculty members, postdocs, staff members all over the world, and I enjoy doing that. And I'll tell you a little bit about what we've done. And this is something that Professor Han started with me. In fact, we had our first paper. I don't know if it was your first paper or not, but it was a good paper. It was published in this little journal called Nature back in 1999. So it was, I think, as far as I remember, it was the first study on exercise and cognition ever published in Science or Nature. So it was somewhat of a hit at the time. But let me tell you about some more recent research, and the title is Take a Hike. I won't tell you about that, but another one of my former students, Dave Strayer, do you remember him? Yeah, he just retired. So when my students start retiring, I know I'm really old, right? And Dave has done a lot of work on nature. The interesting thing about nature is that it involves movement, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But these pictures up here represent different aspects of lifestyle. From the top left, that's nutrition. We know that nutrition is good for our brains and cognition. Fitness on the bottom left. In the middle, some of you might recognize the Beatles, and that's all about social interaction is healthy for our brains and minds. And then on the top right is I guess a slide from Mike Mersnick, who's a member of our National Academy of Sciences and a famous researcher with monkeys. And Mike and others have done a lot of work on cognitive training. We've done some too, but I won't focus on that today. So those are some of the lifestyle factors that have been explored in terms of healthy brains and minds. So this is just a list. I know it's a lot. We'll just hit the highlights here. Of things that I'll go through today. And what I wanted to start with is, so where is the information about basic mechanisms? And one way to get at basic mechanisms that might underlie exercise and physical activity and its effects on minds and brains is with animal research, of course, because we use different methods and we can get at the bottom line, changes in anatomy and physiology, all the way down to the telomere and the neurons and glia and blood supply. So let me just briefly tell you about that, because that underlies a lot of the research that we've done on exercise with humans. So these pictures, the first two pictures come from a colleague's lab that Professor Han knew too. His name is Bill Greeno. Bill passed away a few years ago, but he was a very famous neuroscientist and anatomist. And on the top left, you might be able to see the little rodent heads here. These are rodents exploring this enriched environment. And that's some work that Bill did. And this is, we have a circus in the United States called Cirque du Soleil. It's a French circus. And this is a circus animal, but a circus mouse or rat. I think it's a rat, actually. So this is to illustrate exercise. This is intellectual or cognitive challenges. On the bottom left is social interaction, animals housed together or housed alone. And here's another exercising animal. So how do these experiments work? And they're really pretty simple. This is a sketch from Henrietta von Prague, a colleague who works with animals and exercise. And really there are mostly two different conditions. And for the animals, there's a running wheel or there isn't a running wheel. This would be the control condition on the bottom, and this would be the experimental exercise condition on the top. There's some measurement of cognition and motor control. And if you don't know the water maze task, it's pretty simple. It's a murky bath of water, and there's a platform just under the water so the animals don't have to swim. And if they can remember where it is with respect to the cues in the room, then they've used their memory to navigate. And the question is there a difference between the control condition and the exercise condition? And then often electrophysiology and histology is done. And what do we know from these animal research? Well, on the top, these are photomicrographs from the dentate gyrus of the hippocampus. And as many of you, I'm sure, know, the hippocampus is responsible for an important kind of memory called episodic memory or declarative memory, that is binding together different things like somebody's face, their name, what you talked about when you met with them, and when you met with them. So these little green dots are actually new neurons being born in the dentate gyrus of the hippocampus. And if we move over all the way to the right here, the three conditions are from an early study. There are many of these studies that have been done. And on the y-axis, we have the number of new neurons as a function of an exercise intervention versus a control, that is not having a running wheel. This is the control condition. This is the enriched condition with all the toys and stimuli. And here's the running wheel. And we see that both in the enriched condition and with the running wheel, the animals generate new neurons. And by the way, up until about 15 to 20 years ago, we thought organisms couldn't generate new neurons after they were a year or two old. That's not true. I'm even generating new neurons, and I'm 72 years of age, but not as many as I used to. So we can generate new neurons throughout the lifespan, also supporting cells like glia and astrocytes and so forth. But if we look at all of this on the bottom, these are I wouldn't say all, but many of the effects that have been found in these exercise studies, mostly with rodents. There have been studies done with dogs, with monkeys, but it's mostly rodents. Neurotrophins are proteins that support new neurons and synaptic connections. Synaptogenesis is the interconnection among different neurons with axons. Angiogenesis is new blood supply and so forth, all the way down to enhanced learning and memory. So all of these things and more have been found in animal studies. One of them here I'll talk about a little bit more in terms of humans, because it's a little trickier to get it with humans, but you can create Alzheimer's rodents by doing some genetic manipulation. And this one here, reduced beta amyloid protein in transgene mouse models, what that suggests is that with exercise, you can decrease the effects of the negative effects of simulated Alzheimer's or other forms of age-associated neurodegenerative disease with exercise. The question is, can you do that with humans? Even humans that don't have Alzheimer's but are at risk for Alzheimer's. I'll show you some data that speaks to that. That's not yet published, but hopefully will be soon. So there are a whole variety of different kinds of studies that are done to look at exercise and physical activity effects on cognition, on emotion, and on brain structure and function. So let me show you a few of them. This is an older study that we kind of rediscussed and explored a bit further with a postdoc by the name of Stan Colcom. Stan has become a professor in New York with Mike Milham. And what we've looked at here, this is just one of many effects from this meta-analysis. Essentially what a meta-analysis is, if you haven't done one, is a collection of studies that you treat mathematically to look at whether there's a consistent effect. And the effect we were looking at here is, does exercise, when compared to a control condition, a non-exercise control, or at least a non-cardiorespiratory control, something like walking, running, and bicycling, does it affect various aspects of cognition that are labeled down here on the x-axis? And what is the effect size? How big is the effect? And what we've seen here is that exercise tends to improve many aspects of cognition, which we can look at here, different aspects. But the biggest effect we found in this initial meta-analysis was on executive function, things like working memory, multitasking, dealing with tasks that required some cognitive flexibility. And we'll see that, and this meta-analysis done a while ago, but we'll see a more recent one that just replicated this in a second. So there have been lots and lots and lots of meta-analyses over the years because there are more and more exercise studies that people want to examine quantitatively. So this goes beyond qualitative. And some of them, the one on the left here, is done with acute exercise bouts. Now, acute bouts could be a single bout of exercise for 20 minutes or an hour. Most of the work we've done, well, I've done both, but most of the work I've done and that we've done has been chronic. That is, exercise several times a week for several months, up to even years. And what this meta-analysis suggests is that even single bouts of exercise, especially high intensity, that's HIIT, have a positive benefit. Look at that on executive function. And this is by ranging across over 4,000 young adults. Over on the right is a study that I did with my colleagues in China, in Shenzhen, and it was an attempt to look at changes in functional magnetic resonance imaging, that is connectivity patterns in various networks. And you can have all of these things and you can look at them and look up the studies and read them. So I won't go into the nitty-gritty details, but the senior faculty member here is Lai Zhao, and he's a professor in Shenzhen. Here are a couple more, and then I'll move on to other things. Here's a study just published in this year with a group in the United States. And again, they find large effects for exercise improving cognition, memory, and executive function. And this is an umbrella review, which is an interesting one. It's a meta-analysis of meta-analyses. So you collect all these meta-analyses, you calculate the effect sizes across different meta-analyses. So this goes beyond just single studies, which is good and bad, depending upon what you're looking at. But nonetheless, there are more and more of these umbrella reviews or umbrella meta-analyses. And over on the right here, this is a really interesting one because I'm often asked, so, okay, with healthy young people like yourselves, or middle-aged or older people or children, you can show exercise effects on brain and cognition. But what about people that are at either high risk for age-associated neurodegenerative decline, things like Alzheimer's, vascular disease, Lewy body disease, Parkinson's, on and on and on? Do you still find benefits of exercise, either before, if they have risk factors, or during? And what this study, this meta-analysis has found, and this was published last year, 2024, is that positive exercise effects on activities of daily living, those are basic activities like bathing, grooming, getting dressed, as well as instrumental activities of daily living, more complex, managing your checkbook, taking your medications, cooking, shopping, benefits for all of these abilities, even with people, even with patients with early Alzheimer's disease. So even if you had a grandparent or an older friend who has Alzheimer's disease or other diseases, exercise or physical activity can help there too. So what about some of the basic effects we can take a look at here in terms of cognition? We've looked at a little bit of that, but how about brain structure and function that we can get from MRI and fMRI? I've been working with MRI for I don't know how many years, a lot, let's say 25. In fact, when I was a young faculty member at the University of Illinois, we had this more senior faculty member join us at Illinois from a place called Stony Brook University, where I met my wife and we got our bachelor's degree. It's in New York, outside of New York City. And he came, and soon thereafter I started collaborating with him, and soon thereafter he won the Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine. His name is Paul Lauterbur. So in essence, I thank Paul for teaching me about MRI. He was a chemist, mathematician, physicist. You have to be many things, I guess, these days to win a Nobel. And I was able to work with Paul, and we bought a number of magnets and set up a number of magnets, high field animal magnets, high field human magnets, et cetera, et cetera. But let me tell you a little bit about the research. Again, there are at least two different conditions. And Mr. or Ms. Centipede said, I know all of the fitness fads, but my doctor was right all along. Walking is the best exercise. I'm not sure if it's the best, but it's a good cardiorespiratory exercise that'll improve your lung function, your cardiorespiratory function. And that's the kind of exercise that's mostly been studied, although resistance exercise, which happens to do with weightlifting, either with a machine or barbells and dumbbells, or practices like yoga or Tai Chi. As a young man, I was a martial artist, I was a boxer. This is not good for your brain, but it's too late for me. And even though I know what my brain looks like, I don't know if Professor Hahn has ever seen an image of my brain, but it doesn't look so good. But the good thing about being younger and doing brain damage is things usually heal, even though the brain might not look as good as you would like it to look. So Mr. Gumby here on the right-hand side is usually in a control condition, and it's toning and stretching, something that doesn't improve lung function or cardiorespiratory function. And that's what we compare something like walking or bicycling or weightlifting or yoga or Tai Chi, or things like that. So here are some of the first data I know of, and this involved a number of us in the lab. The first two slices on the left are parallel to the floor, essentially if somebody's standing up at the top of the brain here and further into the brain. And this one is down the middle, it's a sagittal slice. And the little blue panels are panels from, again, this is a comparison of a simple walking experiment with older adults, 6 months, 3 days a week, about an hour a day is the length of the exercise program. And the blue panels are in gray matter, so they would be cell bodies like neurons and glia. And the yellow, which is in the corpus callosum, the GNU, the front of the corpus callosum that interconnects the left and the right hemisphere. All of the blue panels and the yellow panels are all increases in older brains as a function of aerobic exercise. So these are structural changes that we looked at, and this is a number of years ago. This has been replicated many, many times. We can also look more specifically at particular nuclei, and this was with Kirk Erickson, who was also on the lab and is now, I guess he's the head of neuroscience at a hospital, many hospitals in Florida called Advent. He was at University of Pittsburgh for many years. And the area we were really interested in was the hippocampus, again, because this supports high-level memory, putting things together, remembering things, binding things together. And so what we have here is the left, because you have one on the left and one on the right. We looked at other nuclei further down in the brain that we didn't expect differences between, but the blue line is from individuals in the walking group, and the red line toning and stretching, so not improving in a cardiorespiratory sense. And we see this nice separation from baseline to 6 months. This was a year-long intervention, 3 times a week, about an hour a day over a year, over 52 weeks. And we see a nice increase as a function of aerobic exercise, both on the left and the right side. And by the way, this increase was related to improvements in prospective or declarative memory, the kind of memory that's supported by the dentate gyrus of the hippocampus. These are some other data. Aga Brzezinska is now in the Max Planck in I don't know, she might be in Berlin, but I think maybe not. She just moved recently. And Aga in the lab was able to look at white matter. So these are scan sequences called diffusion tensor imaging, and you can see some of the white matter fiber tracks here and here. And these panels in the middle are different fiber tracts on the y-axis from the genu, which is in the front of the corpus callosum that splits down the middle and interconnects the left and the right hemisphere, as well as other areas in the brain, both within the hemisphere and between hemispheres. And on the x-axis, we have VO2 max. Now, VO2 max is the gold standard for cardiorespiratory fitness. The way it works is you often get on a treadmill, it goes faster, it gets steeper, you breathe into an oxygen mask, and we're recording EKG. And this is the gold standard if somebody can achieve it. The tough part is max requires you to stay at a level of exhaustion for a couple of minutes, and not everybody can do that. So sometimes we measure peak. But this is max. And what we see, those little dots are all individuals in this study. And what we see is there's this nice correlation between improvement in the integrity of the different fiber tracts that we can see in these panels and increases in VO2 max. So not only gray matter, the cell bodies, the neurons, the glia, but also white matter, the interconnections that connect different regions of the brain, show improvements in integrity as a function of physical activity and exercise. So how about function now? We've just talked about anatomy. We've talked about white matter and gray matter. So here's a diagram that we explored, and this is Michelle Voss. Michelle's a professor at the University of Iowa. When she was in the lab, we did some of this work, and even some a little later. And what we're looking at here is aerobic fitness. Again, this is walking or jogging, its effects on cognition. And is it mediated or moderated as a function of functional connectivity? This is fMRI rather than MRI. We're looking at connections in different networks that have been mapped out in the brain. And let me show you. This is kind of a coloring book representation of networks. Here are brain slices, and the red is called, represents the default mode network. That's when you're introspecting, thinking about what to eat for dinner, thinking about friends and family and so forth. And the green and the blue are different aspects of executive function and attention. So here we've essentially mapped out the different components which occur throughout the brain in different representations of the brain here, 3 different networks. There are really about 20 networks that have been defined, or perhaps more. But let me show you what happened as a function of a year-long intervention with these functional networks, again, that we can measure with fMRI as compared to MRI. All right, this looks complex, but let's just focus on one of these. So what we're looking at is different interconnections in the default mode and the frontal executive network and many, many other. But let me just unpack this with this one. So on the y-axis, we have connectivity. How connected are these different regions throughout the front, the back of the brain, and sometimes internal as well as cortical. The amount of connectivity, the high numbers are better connected, the low numbers are less connected. And 0 months is before the intervention, before they start this exercise program, as compared to the control. The blue bars are the control, and the yellow-orange bars are the walkers. This is the cardiorespiratory condition. And what we see to different degrees across these different interconnections is that the blue bars go up a little bit, but not much. Connectivity doesn't change much. But we see for the walkers, that is the orange-yellow bars, that they go up quite a bit. And the interesting thing about, so we wanted to know how much they went up. So the folks in the blue and the yellowish orange are 58 to close to 80 years of age, older adults. And as we get older, connectivity declines naturally. We wanted to see if we could increase it. We evidently did. And fortunately, we had 30 younger adults, that's YA, younger adults, 20 to 30-year-olds. And in many cases, we came close to or matched the connectivity of you young people with us older people here, which is pretty remarkable. Another question we might want to ask, though, okay, so these changes in the functional connectivity of the brain, are they related to any performance on cognitive tasks that we might administer to people, which we always administer? And this seems complex, but it's not. But what we're looking at is different interconnections in the default mode network and the executive control network. And here we're looking at 2 different forms of cognition. These are latent variables, so there are multiple measures of each that are combined into these measures. And what we see is a significant correlation with executive function here. So yes, changes in connectivity are related to aspects of cognition. So we can put a little check mark here because this network really does seem to work pretty well. Our study was the first, there have been many subsequent studies. So here's something else that's worth looking at. And we've always been interested in trying to compare and trying to bridge the gap between animal studies of physical activity and exercise and human studies. And we can do different things for different reasons. And of course, we can ask humans more complex questions. So this is just one of the panels that I showed you already. And what we're looking at here, in animals, if you're interested in these nerve growth factors like brain-derived neurotrophin factor or BDNF, IGF-1, VEGF, there are a bunch of them, you would take a snippet of brain tissue. Now, our humans never volunteer for us to go in and take a snippet of brain tissue, so we can measure these proteins in the blood. It's imperfect, it's not where we want to measure it, but unless we take a snippet of your brain tissue, we're not going to be able to do what they do in the animal studies. And on the top here, we have the non-aerobic group and connectivity on the x-axis and BDNF change as a function of this intervention. This is toning and stretching. Nothing significant here, but we go to the bottom, and this is the aerobic walking group over the period of 1 year, and we can see a much steeper slope and a correlation of 0.57, which is highly significant, between an increase in BDNF and an increase in connectivity. So not only is connectivity interesting and related to cognition, but connectivity is related to this protein that engenders new synaptic connections, new capillary beds in the brain, as well as new neurons and supporting structure. And we can do this with humans. Imperfect. So this is a study that I did with my colleagues. It sounds Swedish or Danish, and it is, everybody but me. They're all from Scandinavia, from Sweden, and they happen to have this other machine called a PET machine, a positron emission tomography machine. So we're able to look at dopamine here, and we did this study with a little over 50 subjects, 54 older adults, and we're looking at it in the striatum, in different regions of the striatum, the limbic, the associative, and the sensor motor striatum that's responsible for movement, as well as a variety of other aspects of human performance. And what we see here is that on the y-axis we have a measure of dopamine function, and on the x-axis we have aerobic fitness. And we see a nice correlation between the two. So we can start to look at some neurotransmitters like dopamine by using positron emission tomography. This is an interesting set of data. These are not published. I hope they'll be published soon in a medical journal near you. It's submitted to a major medical journal, and they seem to like it. This is a study, Kirk Erickson, again, one of the former students from the lab, and a number of us, as you can see here, there are a number of people, wrote some very big grants that fortunately the Trump administration hasn't taken away from us, and we're spending many millions of dollars here. It's a big study. It's 650 older adults. We divide them into 3 groups. This is bigger than most. There are some that are bigger, but don't have all the measures. We measure MRI, we measure PET, we measure blood, we measure cognition, we measure gait. You name it, we're probably measuring. And it's over the period, it's a 1-year intervention, and we're able to follow up. We're now following up for 10 years. We have money to follow up for 10 years. So there are 3 different groups. There's the stretching and toning, that's the S&T. There's the 150 minutes a week times 52 weeks. And then there's 75% more, 225. Now in the US, I don't know about Korea, my bet is it's similar. Our government recommends 150 minutes a week of aerobic exercise to maintain cardiorespiratory function. Well, at least our government did. We don't do much science anymore in our government, it appears. But we wanted to know if there were dose response effects. Interestingly, on the y-axis, we have executive function attentional control. And these are 5 tasks that we put together as latent constructs and principal components analyses and structural equation models. And we have baseline here on the X, and then we have 12 months. Interestingly, when you do human experiments, you can't tell people not to do things that are good for them. So even in the baseline condition, people get excited because they feel better and they start doing some aerobic exercise, not to the same extent as the people who just do aerobic exercise, but I can't tell them not to do it because it decreases heart disease, decreases type 2 diabetes, hypertension, strokes. We know it's good for you. We just want to know more about the brain, cognition, and brain function and structure. So what we see here is a nice dose-response effect. The stretching and toning gets the smallest benefit, but still a significant benefit. And then it's the 150 and the 225. So more is better here. And these aren't high-intensity programs. These are deconditioned older people. The term we use in English is couch potato. That's somebody that sits on the couch mostly and watches television. You know, the South Korean shows. I have a number of colleagues that love the South Korean shows. If I spoke Korean, I would watch them, but they're not often dubbed. The soap operas. I have a good friend who's Chinese who now speaks Korean because she loves them so much. So those would be people that watch too much TV, either in the United States or anywhere. And then we can get them more fit. But here's the really interesting part, I think that the journal will be interested in. We can measure in the blood, as well as using positron emission tomography, precursor proteins to Alzheimer's disease. It's called amyloid beta 42 or tau 217. These are phosphorylated proteins. And what we've done is divide our 650 people. These are blood measures. It's interesting because until recently, until the last few years, if you wanted to get measures of these particular proteins that are good biomarkers for Alzheimer's, you had to, in the United States, spend about $6,000 to $7,000 for a PET scan. Nowadays, we can do it with blood for about $250, so a fraction of the cost. So it's much easier. We do both in this study. But here we show people that have low levels, that is they're low risk for Alzheimer's disease. And here are people who are at high risk. They do not have Alzheimer's disease yet, but they're at high risk for it. And what we see is you'd want to know whether people that are at high risk can get big benefits in terms of cognition. That's maybe not the same benefit as people that are at low risk, but look at how these conditions separate out. People that do 225, the green line, get the biggest benefits, the 150 walking, the next biggest, and the people that just do stretching and toning don't get much of a benefit at all. So not only is exercise good for people that are normal or people that have the disease, but people that are at high risk for the disease, it boosts cognition and therefore might buy you a few years, even if you're going to get a disease like this, which is worth everything, I think, to most people. These are not yet published, these data. So we're often asked, is there a point of no return? What if you have a disease? Are you still going to get a benefit from physical activity and exercise? And here are a few panels. I won't go into all of them, but let's do the top one. These are breast cancer patients, top left. And this is Laura Chaddock-Heyman. She was a student in the lab and a postdoc. And we have lower fit cancer patients and higher fit cancer patients. And we see a nice increase here as a function of volume of the brain, total volume across different regions. And it's the same kind of, from a lower baseline, the same kind of benefits for the lower fit and higher fit controls. So nice benefits here. Let's go down to the bottom. There are a number of diseases here. This is from Ruchika Prakash, who's a professor at Ohio State University now. And we have gray matter labeled in yellow here, and white matter tracks in green. And what we find is that people that have multiple sclerosis, which is often thought to be a motor disease, it's not simply a motor disease. Parkinson's used to be thought to be simply a motor disease. It is not. It is also a cognitive disease, as MS is. But these people benefit from the aerobic exercise program, even when they have these diseases. And that includes mild cognitive impairment and Parkinson's too. But I'll skip those. So what about young people? What about kids, if you have children or younger siblings? And we have a lot of data on this. I'll just show you a little bit. So here's the diagram we're testing. Aerobic fitness affecting relational memory or prospective memory or declarative memory, again, binding together different pieces of information that make a whole and have us understand life and people that we meet. And the question is whether hippocampal volume is important in this relationship. So if we go to the bottom, these are all kids. These are 7 to 11-year-olds, and we've done many studies with kids now. And we can look at non-relational memory and relational memory. In this case, it's cross-sectional data from lower fit and higher fit kids, and we can see a nice benefit for the relational memory. But non-relational memory, just remembering faces, just remembering names, doesn't matter. But trying to put them together so you can look at somebody and say, oh yeah, I met you at the store and we discussed this. That's where the big benefit is. Over here on the top right, this is overall volume of the hippocampus on the left and the right side. Lower fit children have much smaller hippocampi than higher fit kids. And on the bottom right, hippocampal volume from smaller to larger on the x-axis and relational memory on the y, and these are all individual kids, and we have this nice relationship. So much of what I've told you about for older adults is true for children too. In fact, some of the effects are even bigger. So just very briefly, we've been doing a lot of studies on many topics, and these days, I guess we'd be foolish if we didn't look into machine learning and what can it do for us. So one of the big problems that we have, and pretty much everybody has, including every society as far as I know, is that a lot of people don't like to do physical activity, don't like to go to the gym, don't like to jog or ride their bicycle. So how do you get people to stick with a program, to continue with a program that's going to benefit you? And how do you predict what factors are important? Let me show you 2 different ways. One is a machine learning way, and the other one is a little different. So here's something Tim Morris and I and some others did. I know this is very complex. The bottom line is simple. What we did was use one form of machine learning called elastic nets. We've used random forests. We've used support vector machines. So a number of them. Gives us about the same results. If we start over on the blue bar, those are the behavioral predictors. Some of them are here. We move to the yellow bar. Those are just the imaging, brain structure and function. What if we combine them with these machine learning algorithms? We can account for the most variance. Still not a tremendous amount of variance, but more variance than we can from any one of these kinds of data. And these are some of the individual subjects that we can predict from this machine learning model, and then the observations are related to the predictions. There is another interesting set of studies that's been done, and this is a lot of people because it's a lot of labs. One of my mentees years ago was Angela Duckworth. Some of you may know that name. She's done phenomenally well. It was the only time I was a mentee with 2 Nobel laureates of somebody, but she had good men, and I'm not saying me, but the 2 Nobel laureates. But Angela's done very, very well, and she does these mega studies, mega meta studies. And so how does that work? So she gets a lot of people to do lab studies on different topics. And on this topic, it was adherence to exercise. They would start exercise programs. She got 50 different labs to run a couple of hundred subjects each and see how long they stuck with the program and what factors predicted how long they'd stick. And this is just an abbreviated list of the factors. These were small financial bonuses, incentives, social norms, audiobook, the kinds of things they provided are ranked ordered in terms of how well people stuck with the program, that is adherence to these programs. And she actually ranked ordered 50 of them. So this is just the top few, top 12, I guess. Not machine learning, not artificial intelligence, but very interesting nonetheless, and I think very important. And you could use machine learning as a way to combine these things, perhaps. What about multimodal interventions? So far we've talked about physical activity and exercise. What about combining physical activity and exercise with other things? Let me show you one example. This is a recent one by Laura Baker and her colleagues. Again, it's a big study. It's I think it's about 1,600 participants. This was just published. This is one worth looking at called the U.S. Pointer Study. So what did they do? So it was a 2-year intervention, which is rare. They don't usually go on 2 years. 1 year tended to be pretty long in the past. And what they did was combine physical exercise, aerobic, resistance, stretching, balance, and so forth, nutrition. They used the MIND diet. It's a lot like the Mediterranean diet. This is invented by people at the University of Chicago. And it's a lot of fruits and veggies and not too much meat, as one would expect. Cognitive and social challenges, cognitive tasks, cognitive learning, and health coaching. And they compared this structure lifestyle intervention and lots of meetings with people who essentially served as coaches to a self-guided intervention. And the question is, how did it work? Yeah, it was 2,100 60 to 79-year-olds. So think of it as a lifestyle intervention, taking the number of factors like exercise, nutrition, cognitive and social challenge, and so forth, and combining them. What we can do here is combine them. What we can't do is often pull them apart. I'll show you how to pull them apart too. And here are the data. Again, this just came out recently. It was just published, one of a couple of big studies. And we see the structured program from baseline out to 2 years shows a benefit. You know, it's a small to moderate benefit, but it's a significant benefit as compared to self-guided. But even self-guided, they got information, they just didn't get the coaching. So this is a somewhat effective intervention too, just not as effective as having coaching, professional coaching for these things. So let me show you another study where this was a study we did. It was done at the Beckman Institute. It included corporations, Aptima, included Abbott, which is a pharmaceutical company in the United States, and it included a number of locations, mostly at the University of Illinois, but nonetheless. So what did we do? So here's one project, and Aaron Barbe was the PI on this. I, of course, helped write the grant and do the experiments. So we did cognitive training, and that was a video game called Mind Frontiers that I invented and gave away to Aptima, which is a video game company. So it essentially took various cognitive tasks like working memory and multitasking and reasoning and built them into an amusing graphical environment, a Wild West, US Wild West environment. And this is the way we tried to make the cognitive training enjoyable. We had physical fitness, we had dorsolateral brain stimulation, light brain stimulation. We also had another experiment. Each had 250 participants in it. Physical fitness, this is cognitive training again, and meditation. And what we did, it generated a tremendous amount of data, but let me just walk you through this table that summarizes the data. We were interested in adaptive reasoning and problem solving, that is higher levels of cognition. This was funded by the Office of Naval Research. So we have a lot of, at least we did have a lot of places that funded us in the past. We'll see how that goes in the next few years, and then it'll hopefully improve again. But we measured different aspects of decision making and different measures for decision making all the way over on the right. And we looked at both unimodal interventions, that is fitness only, as well as cognitive training and fitness, and this would be meditation and a variety of other things. And the higher the number here, the bigger effect size. This is Cohen's D. So what we were able to do is compare unimodal interventions with multimodal interventions. And sometimes the unimodal interventions did quite well. This is a 4-month exercise, cognitive training, and brain stimulation and meditation training program. And people got different aspects or all of them. And then when they got all of them, you had to subdivide the time because it was about 3 hours a week across 4 months. So what we see here is benefits from both combinations of different training, but also the biggest benefits for single benefits were fitness, if we had to choose one, but we don't have to choose one often. So this kind of experiment suggests you can pull apart the contributions of different benefits. Of course, the hard part here is how do you match the time they get in 4 months versus the subdivided time they get in 3 or 4, 1/3 of 4 months. So we spent a lot of money on this, but we could have spent a lot more money to try to pull it apart further. But at least this is some attempt to pull apart the individual contributions of lifestyle factors from the joint contributions. What about generalizability beyond the lab? We've done many things and we continue to do things, but one of my favorites, were you at Illinois when we did this, Professor Hahn? No? Okay. So I've always been interested in virtual reality. And in the beginning, this is back about 20 some odd years ago, it was really expensive. This is a cube that we had these huge RGB projectors to back project the walls, the floor, and the ceiling. And we could immerse people in a virtual reality environment. And I'm not sure how well we'll be able to see this, but we did work with kids, older adults, athletes, all kinds of groups. And what we were interested in is whether there are real world benefits from levels of fitness. Is it simply performance on these perceptual, cognitive, and motor tasks that are well normed, but don't represent much of anything in the real world, or just bits and pieces of things? Or could we have somebody do a real task? And the real task we asked this little girl to do in this experiment, and lots of little boys and girls, was to simply cross the street. But we made it hard to cross the street. We had a lot of cars. We had cars that went at different velocities, and we had different numbers of lanes of traffic. So we could make it so difficult that we could run over virtually, just virtually, the children. Let me show you what
By
happened.
the way, is that you standing there?
No, that's Hank Kazmarski. I don't know if you remember.
Okay. So
Yeah,
they're actually walking. They're walking
they're walking out. The treadmill generates the visual graphics in the cube. Yes. And let's see if we can see much of anything here. It's a little movie. And we have an eye tracker on, so we know where they look. Well, you can see it pretty well. So she's crossing the street, and she's, of course, Professor Hahn knows you teach your children to look both ways, but they don't always do it. So neither do I, evidently, since I've been run over once. We have her cross the street. Pay attention to the traffic. Ooh, look what happens when you get run over. It's blood all over the place, right? It's all red. And we measure everything. We know where they look. We know how fast they go. We know when they go relative to the traffic, whether it's coming from one side or both sides, multiple lanes, single lane, all of that. She didn't get run over that time. So essentially what we do, and what we've done in a number of these experiments with different people, and many of these are published, this one is, and we have an undistracted condition, which is the way you're supposed to cross the street. That is, just pay attention to the traffic and cross the street when it's safe. When you're listening to music on the iPods, or when you're talking to mom or dad on a cell phone. Ooh, this is a hands-free cell phone, by the way. They're not holding it. They have an earpiece. And the black bars are individuals, the children in the higher fit group who do pretty well. They're at like 85% success. By the way, this is crossing success. You can think of this as death rate too. You know, who gets run over? Anybody else been run over? I have. It hurts. You don't want to get run over. And the gray bars are the low fit kids. And what we see is in the undistracted, the music condition, they're pretty similar. The high fit kids do better. But in the phone condition, again, hands-free, not handheld, hands-free. Look at those low fit kids, they get killed off. You know, many of them get killed, right? They get run over. And you can think, and as I did when I first saw these data, oh, of course, the high fit kids run faster, right? They don't. Because we measure everything. We know how fast they go. So there's no difference in how quickly they cross the street, usually jogging, although we told them not to. But what does differ is their decision making. When they look left and they look right, do they think they can make it or not? So they're making a a perceptual cognitive decision as to whether I can make it before another car comes and I get run over. So these are cognitive benefits. They're not motor benefits. So here's an example. Other people have done other things. An example of real-world implications of physical activity. It's not simply cognitive tasks and brain function and structure. So to summarize, I think what I've showed you tonight, and I could show you a lot more, but this is enough, that relatively brief fitness interventions, 6 months, a year, up to 2 years, even some acute, but they don't last long, those effects, improve a variety of perceptual and cognitive abilities, increase brain volume in regions that normally show age-related changes for kids and for older adults, change functional brain networks that we can look at with fMRI. It's gone beyond promising with kids. For a while there weren't many studies with children, mostly with older people. Now there are many studies with everybody. And something I didn't cover today, but exercise decreases anxiety and depression, and there have been meta-analyses on depression, and increases self-esteem and self-efficacy. So it's psychosocial function, emotional function, not simply cognitive function. But where do we go from here? Because there's always more to know. Well, we need to understand the boundary conditions. Not every study finds benefits of physical activity and exercise. I don't know any study that finds deficits. You don't get worse in terms of brain structure and function or cognition. But I'd say 85–90% of the studies find benefits, but not all of them. And here's one that didn't. And it was a 2-year study. In fact, there was a meta-analysis out of the University of Granada. First author was CIRA, C-I-R-I-A. I think it was published in 2023. And they came to the conclusion by some interesting statistical manipulations in this meta-analysis that exercise doesn't have any real effect on cognition. Now, what's crucial in meta-analyses is the studies you select, whether they're well conducted, whether you've covered the field, and a variety of other things. And there is the paper, again, is CIRA et al. It's an umbrella study out of the University of Granada in Spain. You can look at the paper, but look at the response of a number of people. I was part of the team, but I chose not to put my name on the paper, the response letter, because I don't need to be negative about young people that do these studies. But nonetheless, it was a bit of a problem. So I think we need to better understand what are the boundary conditions that produce bigger effects, small effects, or maybe no effects. And, you know, I think one way to get at that are some of these points here. So what about combining different interventions? I've shown you that there are more and more studies that do this, that combine different lifestyle choices that people make, from exercise to diet to cognitive engagement to social interaction. We need to do that. And then we need to know how much, when, and sequence. There was a study published by Gerd Kemperman in Germany a number of years ago, probably 10 years ago now. And that study resulted from a nice debate that Rusty Gage and Gerd and I had at one time, probably 20 years ago, about what would be the optimal sequence of events if you chose different lifestyle variables. Does it make sense to start with one, or start with another, or combine them simultaneously? Most of the studies I've showed you, and the studies these days, are combined simultaneously. Maybe that's not the best way to go. So Gerd Kemperman published a paper with animals, easier to start with animals for sure, where he looked at physical activity, a running wheel for rodents, and he looked at intellectual challenge toys that were stimuli that were changed in the enclosure every few days. And the question was, he knew, because the previous literature suggested, that they both of these interventions, exercise and intellectual stimulation, can increase the number of neurons in the hippocampus, can increase connections among neurons, synaptogenesis, and can increase the vascular bed that supports our brains, that is angiogenesis. But if you sequence them, which one would you start with? And when we had this discussion years and years ago, my suggestion, and some others, was start with exercise, because exercise tends to have very broad effects compared to other lifestyle variables. And that's how Gerd found, when he started with exercise and then progressed to the intellectual challenge, that's when he got the most new neurons in the hippocampus. Would it work the same way for humans? It's hard to look at neurons. It's possible to separate neurons from glia. And in fact, Rusty Gage from UCSD is now the director of the Salk Institute, a very famous neuroscience institute in San Diego. He did a very creative study a number of years ago with some of his postdocs, but he needed to get brain tissue to do the same histology that you did with animals. So how do you get brain tissue from humans? These were brain cancer patients. That's the way you get brain tissue. But the problem is, of course, there are other issues if you have brain cancer. So it complicates things. So there are a number of issues that can be explored as a way to look at boundary conditions and how to increase the magnitude of the benefits. Also, there are more and more studies with genetic moderators. These days, both for sickle cell, does anybody study genetics? No? Oh, did I see a hand? No? Okay. Well, I would look at the genetic literature, even if you're not going to be a geneticist, because it's really interesting. And with techniques like CRISPR-Cas9, we can change particular alleles on particular genes. And most diseases are multi-gene diseases. Lots of genes. Alzheimer's, lots of genes. Most diseases, lots of genes, but not all of them. Cystic fibrosis, Huntington's disease, sickle cell anemia, single gene diseases. So experiments have now been done with sickle cell that have reduced the symptoms to almost nothing by re-engineering human genes. Same thing, even more recent with cystic fibrosis, which is fantastic because we had a lab manager who shouldn't have lived to her age because she has cystic fibrosis. You usually don't live that long, but now her genes can be re-engineered. So that's fantastic. So we need to know much more about genetics, what we can manipulate, what we can't, genetic diseases, and how they interact with lifestyles such as physical activity. What factors predict adherence? Again, most people start in the United States. Health clubs oversell their memberships by about 50% because they're smart, because they know that 50% of people aren't coming, and then they can take their money. So it's a profitable business, I guess, but it'd be nice if it was less profitable and more profitable for the individuals. And then beyond the laboratory door. And that was the Cube, the VR experiments, but this is something from Elizabeth Davis's lab. And what she looks at is achievement in kids who take achievement tests. And I know in Korea, you probably take way more achievement tests than you ever wanted to take as a child. In the United States, we do too, but probably not as much as you do. And what they find is that exercise, in the United States, we used to think that athletes in high school and college were dumb. I'd call it the dumb jock hypothesis. I was one of those dumb jocks. I went to college on a track and field scholarship. I was a pole vaulter and a runner. And what we find, and what Elizabeth Davis finds, is they're not dumb at all. If it's cardiorespiratory fitness, they're smarter than the kids that don't exercise. So we need to do more of that too. Questions?